Once upon a time, in a small village, there was a young girl named Mia who had a mischievous pet parrot named Coco. Coco loved causing trouble and would often fly around the village, squawking loudly and disturbing the peace. Mia, determined to teach Coco some manners, decided to use classical conditioning to train her pet bird. She wanted to associate a specific sound with calm behavior. Mia began by selecting a wind chime as the neutral stimulus. It is a neutral stimulus because at this point, the wind chime had no particular effect on Coco. But whenever Coco was calm and well behaved, she would gently ring the wind chime, creating a soft and melodic sound. Moreover, Mia introduced a treat, a yummy fruit that Coco loved. Naturally, whenever Mia offered Coco the treat, the parrot would eagerly snatch it and happily munch away. The yummy fruit was the unconditioned stimulus because it can naturally elicit Coco's excitement and delight. This excitement and delight when receiving the treat was the unconditioned response. Mia then proceeded with the conditioning phase. Whenever Coco started causing a disturbance, Mia would calmly and gently ring the wind chime before offering the treat. She repeated this process consistently every time Coco misbehaved. Over time, the sound of the wind chime alone began to elicit a response in Coco as she associated it with the forthcoming treat. The wind chime had acquired a new meaning for Coco. The wind chime, which was initially a neutral stimulus, began to transform into a conditioned stimulus. Finally, whenever Coco heard the wind chime, she would stop her mischievous behavior, perch herself quietly, and eagerly await her reward. The sound of the wind chime became a signal for Coco to calm down and exhibit good behavior. Mia was delighted with the progress she had made using classical conditioning with Coco. The once unruly parrot had transformed into a well-behaved companion. Whenever Mia wanted Coco to settle down, all she had to do was gently ring the wind chime and Coco would immediately respond. This is called conditioned response. This heartwarming story showcases how classical conditioning can be applied to train animals even in unconventional settings like training a mischievous parrot. Through the power of associations and learned responses, Coco the parrot learned to modify her behavior and bringing joy and peace to the village with Mia's gentle guidance. Hi everyone, in this video we will explore the fascinating components of classical conditioning. We will break down each component, providing clear explanations and relatable examples to help you grasp the concept easily. Join us as we explore real-life scenarios where classical conditioning plays a role from training animals to influencing human behavior. By the end of this video, you will have a solid understanding of the components of classical conditioning and their practical applications in various fields. I am Blessing Varghese, a Junior Research Fellow at Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala, and welcome to my channel, Mindscape. Number 1. The Unconditioned Stimulus or UCS. The unconditioned stimulus plays a crucial role in classical conditioning. It is a stimulus that naturally and automatically triggers a response without any prior learning. It elicits a reflexive and innate reaction from an organism. It is typically something that has a biologically significant impact and produces an involuntary response. For example, let's consider Pavlov's famous experiment with dogs. In his study, food served as the unconditioned stimulus. When the dogs were presented with food, they naturally salivated in response. The food, being biologically significant, had the inherent ability to evoke the salivary response without any conditioning. The UCS is essential because it sets the stage for the conditioning process. It serves as the initial stimulus that prompts the desired response. Without the UCS, there would be no basis for forming associations and eliciting learned responses. Once the UCS is identified and understood, it can be paired with a neutral stimulus through conditioning to create a conditioned response. The UCS acts as a benchmark against which the effects of conditioning can be measured. Through repeated pairing with the neutral stimulus, the UCS establishes an association that allows the neutral stimulus to eventually elicit the conditioned response on its own. Understanding the role of the UCS is fundamental in comprehending classical conditioning. It helps shed light on how organisms learn and respond to their environment by forming associations between meaningful stimuli and subsequent responses. Imagine you are walking through a park on a sunny day. As you stroll along, you suddenly feel a light drizzle of raindrops falling on your skin. In this situation, the rain serves as the UCS. The rain is a natural and unconditioned stimulus that triggers an automatic response in you. As the raindrops touch your skin, you naturally respond by feeling wet and may instinctively seek shelter to cover yourself with an umbrella or jacket. The UCS of rain evokes a reflexive response without any prior conditioning or learning. It is a biologically significant stimulus that prompts an immediate reaction due to our innate sensitivity to change in our environment. Number 2. The unconditioned response or UCR. The unconditioned response is the automatic and innate response that is elicited by the unconditioned stimulus without any prior learning or conditioning. It is a natural reaction that occurs in response to the presentation of the UCS. The UCR is typically consistent and predictable as it is hardwired within an organism's biology. It is not under conscious control and is often a reflexive or instinctual response to the UCS. For example, let's consider the experiment with dogs. In this experiment, the UCS is the presentation of food, and the UCR is the dog's natural response of salivating when they encounter the food. Salivation is an automatic and unlearned reaction that occurs in anticipation of food and is triggered by the UCS of food itself. In another example, if you accidentally touch a hot stove, the UCS would be the heat from the stove, and the UCR would be the immediate withdrawal of your hand. The UCR of pulling your hand away from the hot stove is an instinctive and unconditioned response to the intense heat stimulus. The UCR is significant because it serves as the baseline for measuring changes in behavior during the conditioning processes. Number 3. The neutral stimulus or NS. Neutral stimulus refers to a stimulus that does not initially elicit a specific response or reaction. Ivan Pavlov's experiments with the dogs provide a classical example of how a neutral stimulus can become associated with a meaningful stimulus through classical conditioning. In his study, Pavlov used a bell as a neutral stimulus. At the beginning of the experiment, the sound of the bell had no inherent significance to the dogs and did not produce any particular response. However, by repeatedly pairing the sound of the bell with the presentation of food, which naturally caused the dogs to salivate, the neutral stimulus became a conditioned stimulus. Eventually, the sound of the bell alone was sufficient to trigger the conditioned response of salivation in the dogs. This transformation of the neutral stimulus into a conditioned stimulus demonstrates how associations can be formed between neutral stimuli and specific responses through the process of classical conditioning. Number 4. Conditioned stimulus or CS. A conditioned stimulus is a previously neutral stimulus that through repeated pairing with an unconditioned stimulus acquires the ability to elicit a conditioned response. Ivan Pavlov's experiments with the dogs exemplify the concept of a conditioned stimulus. In his research, Pavlov initially presented a bell which had no inherent meaning to the dogs alongside the unconditioned stimulus of food. Over time and with repeated pairings, the dogs began to associate the sound of the bell with the impending arrival of food. Eventually, the bell alone became a conditioned stimulus that could trigger a conditioned response in the dogs, such as salivation, even without the presence of the food. This demonstrated that through classical conditioning, a neutral stimulus can acquire the power to elicit a specific response by forming an association with an unconditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus plays a crucial role in the process of learning and shaping behavior. Imagine a person who loves the smell of freshly baked cookies. Whenever they smell the aroma of cookies baked in the oven, they experience a feeling of joy and anticipation. In this scenario, the smell of the cookies is the unconditioned stimulus because it naturally elicits a positive emotional response. Now, let's introduce a neutral stimulus, such as the sound of a particular song playing in the background while the cookies are baking. Initially, this song has no inherent connection to the person's emotional response. Through repeated pairings of the song with the smell of freshly baked cookies, the person starts to associate the song with the pleasurable experience of enjoying cookies. Over time, the neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. Eventually, just hearing the song alone, even without the smell of cookies, can trigger a conditioned response in the person, leading to feeling of joy and anticipation. The neutral stimulus has transformed into a conditioned stimulus capable of evoking a response on its own. And finally, conditioned response or CR. A conditioned response is a learned response that is elicited by a conditioned stimulus through the process of classical conditioning. It is a behavioral or physiological reaction that occurs in anticipation or association with a conditioned stimulus. The conditioned response is acquired through repeated pairing of the conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. Ivan Pavlov's experiments with the dogs provide a classic example of a conditioned response. For instance, after repeatedly pairing the sound of a bell with the presentation of food, the dog started salivating in response to the bell alone. In this case, the salivation became the conditioned response because it was acquired and triggered by the conditioned stimulus through the process of classical conditioning. The conditioned response demonstrates how an organism's behavior can be modified and shaped by learned associations between stimuli and responses. In conclusion, the elements of classical conditioning provide a framework for understanding how associations are formed between stimuli and responses. The unconditioned stimulus and conditioned response represent the natural, unlearned relationship in a given situation. Through the process of pairing a neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus capable of eliciting a conditioned response. Acquisition occurs as the association between the conditioned stimulus and the conditioned response strengthens over repeated pairings. However, extinction can also happen when the conditioned stimulus is presented without the unconditioned stimulus, leading to the weakening or disappearance of the conditioned response. The elements of classical conditioning shed light on the mechanisms behind learning, behavior modification, and the formation of emotional responses in various organisms. Thank you all for watching this video on classical conditioning. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We hope this exploration has provided you with valuable insights and a deeper understanding of how our mind learn and adapt. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating videos on psychology and human behavior. We appreciate your continued support and we look forward to bringing you more educational content in the future. Thank you again and until next time.